Order in the court. The judge's gavel struck the wooden block with a resounding crack, the impact echoing like a rifle shot through the chamber. The momentary furor of chatter, whispers, and fidgeting of the crowd ceased with the imperceptible decision to remain silent. The room was heavy with an oppressive silence, like all the air had been sucked from it at one moment. All eyes, the jurors, the lawyers, the reporters packed onto the press benches, and the spectators who had been waiting weeks simply to catch a glimpse of this trial, shifted to the defendant's chair. There she sat, Elena Cross. Once the elegant spouse of a wealthy businessman, she was now labeled as a cold-blooded killer. Charged with murdering her wealthy husband during the night hours, she became the focal point of one of the most scandalous trials the city witnessed. Her demeanor shouted a different tale than the newspapers had screamed. Elena wasn't seething. She wasn't sobbing. She wasn't pleading for clemency. Rather, she sat immobile, her back impossibly rigid, her neatly folded hands in her lap, as if she were just an obedient dinner guest. Her white face revealed nothing. The jury looked at her intently, some suspiciously, others curiously. Was this the face of a guilty woman who had carefully planned her husband's murder for dollars? Or was this the face of an innocent woman, beaten by relentless accusations and holding on to dignity in her final hours of liberty? The tension in the room was so palpable that it threatened to hum against the walls. The trial had been ongoing for weeks, with every day being filled with contentious arguments, incriminating evidence, and raw tears. The prosecution depicted Elena as a scheming woman motivated by greed, who wanted to inherit her husband's wealth. They talked of insurance policies, hidden SMS messages, and poisonous chemicals discovered in the home. But the defense had an equally persuasive tale, that Elena had been set up, that there were figures lurking in the background, and that the true perpetrator walked free. And though the arguments went on, the case was soon to lose its passion. The jury seemed tired, the reporters retold the same tales, and the public had started to assume that they had heard it all before. Until now, because today something special was going to happen. The whispers started when the judge declared that a surprise witness would be presented. Murmurs spread all over the gallery like a wave breaking over a packed beach. People leaned in towards each other, their quiet voices full of curiosity and guesswork. Who is it? Nobody said anything about a new witness earlier. Perhaps someone from Elena's past. Or someone who witnessed the crime. Even the lawyers moved uncomfortably, their uncertain glances flashing between each other. The prosecution waited both guarded and eager, as if anticipating a knockout punch. The defense, however, stiffened in their positions, their finely honed plans now on the verge of collapse. But the most revealing response was from Elena herself. For the first time during the trial, her poise cracked, barely. A shadow of confusion flashed on her face, followed by the slightest quivering of her lips. Her attorney leaned into her, speaking frantically in a whisper. But Elena shook her head, her eyes large. She didn't know either. Whomever this enigmatic witness was, Elena had not been informed. The very fact was sufficient to cause a second wave of apprehension in the courtroom. The anticipation became unbearable. Individuals leaned forward in their chairs, their gazes turned towards the high double doors at the rear of the courtroom. The wooden panels shone in the artificial light, and each passing second made them seem more massive, as if they were restraining a storm that waited to burst forth. Even the judge appeared agitated. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gavel at his side, waiting to fall at the first sign of anarchy. One reporter's pen slid from her hand, ringing out on the floor, and half the courtroom sprang at the noise. There was nervous laughter for an instant, dying immediately, smothered beneath the weight bearing down upon them. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge spoke up, firm but constricted, "you are going to be hearing evidence that might change the direction of this trial. I remind each and every one of you, respect the court, be silent, and let the proceedings take their course without interruption." Silence fell again. Elena's breathing came faster. She attempted to cover it up by folding her hands more tightly, her nails making creases in her skin, until her knuckles whitened. Her heart pounded savagely into her ribs. She felt the jury's gaze upon her, felt their suspicion building. Did they suspect she knew what was going to happen? Did they think she was concealing something? She swallowed tightly, her eyes glued to the doors. The handles shook, the doors groaned, and all of that courtroom held its breath. Was this the moment that would condemn her? Or was this the moment that would turn everything around? The uncertainty was driving it mad. Because in that suspended moment, before the doors swung open, anything could happen. A witness could come forward, who verified Elena's deepest culpability, or one that blew the case to smithereens. And Elena, for all her aplomb, for all her serenity, did not know which it would be. The large oaken doors at the rear of the courtroom creaked as they swung open. All eyes turned together, like a chorus waiting for the arrival of the lead performer in a play. But this was no play. This was life and death. And the figure stepping inside carried the weight of truth or ruin. The figure who came in was a tall one, with a lean body that appeared to be thinner than it ought to have been, his clothes hanging off him as if he had been away from the world for much, much too long. His were dark, shadowy eyes that darted nervously around the room, and his very presence made a ripple of discomfort run down every spine in the room. Gasps followed by wild whispers burst forth. It can't be. Where in the world has he been? I believed him dead. Even the mask of sternness from the judge broke. He leaned over, looking over his glasses, his voice crashing the whisper like a hammer. Mr. Daniel Pierce, he declared, his voice both shocked and authoritative. Come forward. The name fell like a bombshell. Daniel Pierce, Elena Cross's brother-in-law, the younger brother of the very guy she was blamed for killing. A guy who had disappeared the evening of the killing, leaving only questions, doubts, and a trail of conspiracy theories. Some had claimed he left town to avoid debts. Others that he had been silenced, murdered to keep him mute. But here he was, flesh and blood, his very presence redefining the script of the trial. Elena's breath caught. Her eyes went wide, and for the first time since the trial commenced, her facade of control cracked apart into visible terror. Why was he here? And more to the point, whose team was he on? The judge's gavel came down again. Order in the court. I will have silence. The room fell silent grudgingly, but the tension hung in the air, as if the very walls were humming. The defense attorney leaned forward toward Elena, speaking in a frantic whisper. Did you know about this? Did you know he would be called? Elena shook her head in fast, jerky motions. Her lips parted, but no words emerged. She really didn't know. Her shock was raw, uncalculating. Daniel's footsteps reverberated in the room as he made his way to the witness stand. Every step was too loud, too intentional, the sound echoing off the marble floors, piercing the ears of everyone in attendance. He shunned Elena's gaze, though she looked at him in desperation, hoping for some glimmer of what lay ahead. At last, he held up his hand, took the oath, and sat down, his body shaking ever so slightly. The prosecutor did not hesitate. She stood, smoothing her blazer, a tiny smirk spreading across her lips. Whatever was going to transpire, she felt sure would put Elena away for good. Pierce, she started, her tone composed but as cutting as a knife. You vanished on the same night your brother was murdered. For months, your location was a mystery. Explain to this court why. Daniel paused. His eyes scanned the room, skimming fleetingly over the reporters writing frantically, the jurors leaning forward with avid interest, and then lastly Elena, whose face was the color of white marble. When he finally began to speak, his voice broke. I vanished because I was scared. Scared of what I witnessed. Scared of who would hunt me down if I told the truth. Gasps rolled once more. The judge raised his gavel but restrained himself, allowing the theatrics to build. The prosecutor moved in closer. And what truth is that, Mr. Pierce? What did you observe that night? Daniel's fists curled over the rail of the stand. He shut his eyes for an instant, as if reliving a bad dream. When his eyes snapped open, they blazed with heat. I saw who murdered my brother. The courtroom exploded. Screams, gasps, and wails filled the air like a bomb's blast. The judge slammed his gavel again and again. Silence, I demand silence in this court. Elena's whole body stiffened. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the moment. All the cameras zoomed in. All the pens scribbled with increased urgency. All the jurors sat paralyzed, hearts racing in anticipation. The prosecutor edged closer, her voice shuddering with anticipation. "Tell us, Mr. Pierce, who murdered your brother?" Daniel breathed in deeply, his gaze finding Elena at last. Agonizingly, locked, for an instant, it was as if the whole world hung in the balance, in that one look. Her gut bottomed out, a clammy sweat erupting across her skin. Then Daniel spoke, the words hanging in the air like scalpel blades. "It wasn't Elena." The courtroom exploded once more, this time more loudly, the din of shock, incredulity, and indignation boiling into a roar. Elena's mouth hung open, tears filled her eyes. The judge bellowed, "Order, order," pounding so forcefully, his gavel creaked almost in two. The prosecutor was taken aback. If not the defendant, then who? Daniel's voice trembled, but his message was unmistakable. "Tonight, my brother phoned me frantically. He said somebody was threatening him. Somebody close. I hurried to his place. And when I arrived, I saw him on the floor, struggling to breathe, and standing over him was his business partner, Victor Hale." A clap of thunder shook the room. Everyone's gaze snapped to the last row, where Victor Hale sat in his crisply pressed suit, his face crimson with fury. He leapt from his seat, fists balled, but two bailiffs stepped forward at once and held him back. Elena gasped, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. She wasn't the monster. She wasn't the villain. Not in Daniel's eyes, at least. For the first time in weeks, hope flared within her chest. But looking into Victor's distorted face, his eyes like daggers fixed on hers, Elena knew the trial had just changed into something even worse. Because Victor Hale was not a man who went down quietly. And if Daniel was speaking the truth, then this courtroom was going to be the war zone, for a conflict far larger than she could ever have dreamed. The courtroom remained in an uproar from Daniel Pierce's shockingly explosive declaration. Pencils scribbled wildly. Jurors shot each other uncomfortable looks, and onlookers slouched forward so far they might topple off the benches. The judge, visibly shaken but still collected, brought his gavel down 3 times. "Silence, this court will come to order immediately." The noise receded, but tension just shimmered thicker, weighing down each breast like intangible chains. Daniel's breathing was labored and quick. As he stood on the witness stand, sweat dotted his forehead, but his eyes never faltered. He had let loose the truth, or what he considered to be the truth, and it lay suspended in the air like a live wire, waiting to ignite into anarchy. The prosecutor, visibly shaken by the turn of events, attempted to compose herself. She smoothed her notes, advanced, and her voice was sharp, but not steady. "Mr. Pierce, do you really anticipate that this jury will be able to believe that after months of silence, you would come in here today with a tale that utterly refutes all previous testimony?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "I don't hope they'll just believe me. I hope they'll see the terror in my eyes, the burden I've borne. I kept quiet because I was intimidated, because I knew if I opened my mouth, I'd be next." A murmur ran through the jury box. One of the jurors, a middle-aged woman, with silver hair, leaned forward regarding Daniel as if considering his soul. Another wrote at furious length on his notepad, forebrows furrowed. The prosecutor pressed on. "And you testify that the man you saw was Victor Hale, your deceased brother's business partner. The same Victor Hale, who has already testified under oath, denying any culpability." Daniel's voice increased, louder now. "Yes, I saw him. I went through that open door, and there he was. My brother was on the floor, struggling for breath, his lips frothing, his face already growing pale, and Victor was standing over him, clutching the glass." The courtroom gasped as a whole. Elena's hands shook convulsively, her knuckles white as bone as she gripped the table. She had replayed this nightmare countless times, accused of lacing her husband's drink with poison. And now, finally, someone else's name was in the air. Someone else's face wore the accusation. Victor Hale, her husband's longtime lover, his so-called buddy, the man who had sat condescendingly in the back of the courtroom, chatting with lawyers, smiling through testimony, as if her fall was sport. Now, everyone watched him. Victor slowly stood up. His face was cold, his lips twisting into a sneer. This is scandalous. Lies. Blatant lies. His voice boomed through the room, so intense that two bailiffs moved forward naturally. The judge rapped his gavel. Mr. Hale, sit down immediately, or you will be removed from this courtroom. Victor's eyes seared into Daniel, like two burning flames. The room gasped for a heartbeat, wondering if violence would break out. But with a derisive laugh, Victor sank back into his chair, his scowl never wavering from the witness stand. The prosecutor, visibly shaken by Victor's tirade, attempted to regain her footing. She confronted Daniel again. You say you vanished because you were threatened. Tell us, Mr. Pierce, who threatened you? Daniel swallowed hard, his Adam's apple jutting out. Victor did. He warned me that if I uttered a word, I'd be just like my brother. That's why I left. That's why I hid all these months. Because I believed him. The gallery broke out once more. Whispers, gasps, the scratch of pens. The judge yelled for quiet, but this time even he looked shaken by where the case was headed. The defense attorney, catching scent of blood, sprang to his feet. Your Honor, if I might, with your permission, cross-examine the witness. The judge nodded brusquely. Proceed. The defense attorney stepped forward to Daniel, his words measured but urgent. Mr. Pierce, let me be specific. You are testifying, under oath, that Elena Cross, my client, did not murder her husband by poisoning. That rather, Victor Hale was at the scene with the glass in hand. Daniel's tone was firm now, louder than it had been. Yes, that's what I'm saying. The attorney walked slowly in front of the jury, allowing the words to settle in like lead weights. And you remained quiet because you were afraid for your life. Daniel nodded. I went underground because I understood Victor's power, his reach. I understood that he could kill me if I spoke out. But seeing Elena sit here, accused of something she didn't do, I couldn't remain silent any longer. Elena's eyes welled up with tears. For the first time in weeks, someone had said words that removed the heavy burden on her shoulders. She was no longer alone. But Victor wasn't done. He leapt to his feet once more, venom dripping from his voice. This is an act, a desperate ploy to clear a guilty woman. Do you expect a jury to accept this miserable tale? The judge growled. Sufficient. Sit down or I will find you in contempt. But Victor leaned forward, pointing a trembling finger at Daniel. You'll regret this. You'll regret every word. The threat hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the atmosphere. The bailiff stepped closer, ready if Victor made another move. Elena's stomach churned. She knew that look in Victor's eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of losing control. And that made him even more The defense lawyer took advantage of the moment. Turning towards the jurors, he spoke loudly. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it yourselves. A man who has nothing to lose, who put his life in danger by coming back here, has spoken the truth. Elena Cross is not the killer. The killer is here with us, and he knows it. Victor's jaw tightened. The jury's eyes pierced into him. For the first time, the tide was shifting. But then, a twist. The prosecutor smirked, regaining some of her edge. Your Honor, the witness's testimony is dramatic. Yes, but where is the proof? Where is the evidence that Victor Hale had any involvement? Without evidence, this is nothing but a tale told by a frightened man. A silence fell once more. She was correct. Without evidence, Daniel's statements were susceptible. The judge addressed Daniel. Mr. Pierce, do you have any evidence for your testimony? Daniel flinched. His hands shook. He parted his lips to speak, then closed them once more. Elena's heart faltered. Was this the end? Would his bravery be what gave way under the prosecutor's attack? Daniel leaned forward, his voice descending to a whisper that nevertheless carried across the room. Yes, I have evidence, but if I produce it, it could cost me everything. The whole room came to a standstill. The truth was no longer merely a tale. It was a weapon, and Daniel was going to make the choice of whether or not to wield it. The courtroom was so silent that the stillness weighed on the walls, threatening to break them. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Daniel Pierce, as his final words reverberated in the room. Yes, I have proof, but if I show it, it may cost me everything. Gasps of shock ran through the gallery. Jurors shifted in their seats. Even the judge, who had presided over countless trials in his years on the bench, leaned forward, his gavel lying idle in his hand. Proof. That one word was a knife to the heart of Victor Hale, the arrogant businessman who sat stiff in the courtroom now, his jaw clenched, and his hands bunched into fists on the table. But it was his eyes, smoldering, flicking, almost feral, that gave away the truth. The prosecutor, aware of the chance to regain the initiative, pushed on. Mr. Pierce, the court will not stand for indefinite melodrama. If you have proof, now is the time to produce it. Otherwise, your testimony will be viewed for what it is. A last-ditch effort to salvage your sister-in-law. The defense counsel sprang from his seat. Objection, Your Honor. The witness should be allowed to fully explain without harassment. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Enough. Mr. Pierce, the jury deserves clarity. What is this evidence you claim to possess? Daniel inhaled shakily, his shoulders rising and falling, as if he carried the weight of the world. His voice dropped, raw but steady. The night my brother died, he left me something. A letter, he said if anything ever went wrong with him, that I should store it somewhere safe. I was too scared to give it to them before, but I can't keep it anymore. An electric current ran through the courtroom. A letter. Daniel extended cautiously into his jacket pocket. For an instant the bailiffs stiffened, fingers resting on their belts. But it was not a gun Daniel produced from his pocket. It was a small sealed envelope, its corners worn, its paper discolored by months of concealment. He waved it before the court. This is my brother's last warning. The ensuing gasp was thunderous. Reporters came close to stumbling over each other writing. Jurors looked at each other with wide-eyed stares. Elena grabbed her chest, her breathing choppy. Victor Hale's face went pale. The prosecutor snapped. Objection, this alleged letter could have been forged. It has no proven authenticity. The defense lawyer retorted, his voice booming. Then let us see it authenticated. Let the handwriting experts study it. Let the jury hear the dying man's words. The judge held up a hand, quieting both camps. His voice was somber. The evidence will be tested. Bailiff produced the letter. Daniel's hand shook as he handed the envelope over to the bailiff, who accepted it with grave deference and handed it over to the judge. The courtroom collectively leaned forward, anxious to catch a glimpse of what was on the paper. The judge slit the seal carefully, drawing out one sheet of paper filled with neat, deliberate script. His forehead scrunched up as he read in silence, his lips compressing into a thin line. Then, after a deep breath, he looked up. This letter, he replied slowly, was composed by the victim, Mark Pierce, 2 days before his death. It reads, if something happens to me, it will be due to Victor Hale. He has threatened me over and over again. He wants total control of the company, and said he would do whatever it takes to get it. The words strike like a thunderclap. The courtroom was in an uproar. Yells, wails, gasps, the wild scribbling of reporters' pens. Elena buried her face in her hands, weeping. Jurors sat paralyzed, their faces contorted with astonishment. Victor pounded his fists on the table, leaping to his feet in rage. Lies! The whole thing. That letter is a forgery. The judge bellowed. Mr. Hale, you sit down or be taken out of this courtroom at once. Victor's voice trembled with anger. You're all idiots if you think this. She murdered him. He indicated Elena, spittle spraying from his lips. She wanted his money, his wealth, and now they're spinning it around me. But his accusations sounded farcical. The jury weren't looking at Elena any longer. They were gazing at him. At the bead of sweat trickling down his temple. At the alarm in his eyes, at the fissures spreading through the mask he had worn so boldly all these weeks. The defense attorney pounced, his voice thundering with indignant anger. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you heard Daniel Pierce's testimony. You witnessed for yourselves the letter written by the victim himself. This is not lying. This is a man's dying truth. A truth that points directly at Victor Hale. He faced them, pointing at Elena. And in the meantime my client, a bereaved wife, has been taken through purgatory, charged with a crime she didn't commit. Ask yourselves, who had something to gain from Mark Pierce's murder? Elena, already living in comfort and security, or Victor Hale, who desired complete domination of the company, who threatened Mark in public,
who now shudders before you because his crimes are finally revealed. The words seemed to reverberate like thunder. Elena's tears flowed freely, now her shoulders heaving as the defense's words engulfed her like a thin shield. She finally let herself imagine that freedom was within reach, that the nightmare would perhaps end at last. Victor, though, wasn't done yet. His words cut through the silence, shrill and wild. You think you've won? You think a piece of paper means anything? I created that business with Mark. He was weak, and I supported him for years. He deserved what he had coming to him. The confession, entangled as it was in malice, slipped out like venom. The room exploded once more, this time louder than before, the noise of universal shock. Bailiffs rushed forward, pinning Victor by the arms as he fought, yelling invective at Daniel, at Elena, at all who had the temerity to glance at him. The judge's gavel came down over and over. Enough, Mr. Hale, you are out of order. Bailiffs, take him away now. As Victor was being dragged off, his mad screams rang through the room. This isn't over. You'll all regret this. You hear me? You'll regret this. The door clanged shut behind him, and suddenly there was silence. A silence denser, deeper, more profound than any there had ever been. The judge addressed the jury, his expression somber. You have heard the testimony. You have seen the evidence. Tomorrow you will deliberate. With that, the gavel came down a final time, and the court was adjourned for the day. Elena leaned forward in her chair, shaking. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder, speaking softly into her ear words she scarcely heard. Daniel stood over by her, his face white, his body shaking with fatigue. But deep within, for the first time since the nightmare had started, Elena felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope, for because the truth, bloody, perilous and hard-earned, was at last in the light. And in that courtroom where deceit had long held sway, the ultimate surprise had torn it all down. The courtroom was so full that the crowd stood along the rear wall. The air was heavy, as if the walls themselves were panting in breaths with everybody else. The judge's gavel lay silently before him, but the significance of what was to be done weighed more than any wood or metal. Elena Cross perched on the defense table, her frame tense, her hands tightly fisted in her lap.
She had heard every sentence, every statement, every denial and accusation in the same steadfast silence. Some had seen it as coldness, others as strength. But today, when the last words were spoken in the courtroom, her control resembled desperation. The prosecutor, Mr. Crane, presented his closing argument with the assurance of a man who felt that victory was already within his grasp. Members of the jury, he boomed, this case is a case of greed and betrayal. Elena Cross poisoned her husband, a man who trusted her, a man who gave her everything. We presented you with the policy of life insurance. We presented you with the financial interest. We presented you with buying arsenic. And even when there appeared a mysterious witness, it only proved one thing, that this woman is deadly. Don't be deceived by her silence. Justice should make itself heard. We are requesting you to find her guilty. He moved away, his eyes as sharp as daggers, and silence fell. Next, Miss Daniels, Elena's lawyer, stood up. Unlike Crane, she did not radiate force. She glided to the jury, hands clasped, voice gentle but slicing through the tension like a whisper in the darkness. You've been informed this is a tale of greed. But I want to know, what tale is actually happening here? The prosecution wishes for you to envision Elena as evil. But the reality is more complicated. Yes, she purchased chemicals. Yes, she stood to gain financially. But you listened to the witness. You listened to Mr. Dalton, admitting his role in falsifying records. You listened to the neighbors describe the husband's explosive temper. And you saw for yourself the way the police investigation discounted key leads, because it was simpler to finger the wife. Ask yourselves, did you view evidence more than a reasonable doubt? Or did you view the shadow of suspicion cast as fact? Her voice quivered slightly as she continued. Don't ruin an innocent woman's life because it's easy. If you have even the smallest flicker of doubt, your responsibility is clear. Let justice, not assumption, guide you today. She sat down, laying her hand softly on Elena's arm. For the first time,
Elena's eyes were moist, as if tears on the point of breaking through the steel mask that had covered her face for weeks. The judge's voice cut through the silence. The jury will retire to deliberate. The wait.
The jurors exited, their faces inscrutable. The courtroom hummed with low murmurs as everyone wondered what the verdict would be. Some figured Elena was doomed. Others suspected that the secret witness had turned things around. Elena sat immobile, gazing at the shine of the wood on the table. Something was whispered in her ear by her lawyer, but she hardly reacted. In her head, everything faded. The trial, the charges, the faces, all she could sense was the thud of her heart. Minutes passed into hours. The audience stirred restlessly. Coffee cups were filled, folks glanced at their watches, and the bailiff walked back and forth. At last, after close to 3 hours, the door swung open. The jurors had come back. The room fell silent in a heartbeat. The verdict. The judge spoke to the foreperson, a middle-aged woman with unflinching eyes. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. The woman clutched a piece of paper, her hand shaking just a little as she handed it to the bailiff. The bailiff passed it to the judge, who unfolded it very slowly. The whole room leaned forward, holding their breath. In the case of the state versus Elena Cross, on the indictment of murder in the first degree, the wait seemed to last forever. Elena's whole life hung in that second. We, the jury, find the defendant. The foreperson's voice broke in, strong and clear. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, even sobs filled the air. Some spectators clapped. Others cursed. The judge's gavel slammed repeatedly, demanding order. Elena sat frozen, as if she hadn't heard the words. Not guilty. Her eyes flickered with disbelief. Miss Daniels gripped her hand tightly. You're free, Elena, she whispered, her voice breaking with relief. You're free. The twist. But before Elena could gasp, the prosecutor, Mr. Crane, stood up suddenly. His cheeks were red, his tone biting with rage. Your Honor, the state petitions that Miss Cross be kept in custody until new evidence. The witness statements have created more questions. The judge interrupted. The jury has spoken. Case closed. Cross is released right away. Elena's knees almost gave way as she stood up. Reporters swarmed to the aisles, cameras blinding, voices calling out questions. Elena? How are you? Did you kill him? What's going on now? She did not answer. She merely walked, steps slow, her face pale but impassive. But as she approached the door, her gaze fell upon a figure in the hall. Mr. Dalton, the hidden witness. He glared at her, a weak, sly smile playing on his lips. Time stood still for an instant. Did he rescue her? Or did he condemn her otherwise? The haunting ending outside the courthouse. The evening air struck Elena like a wave. Flashbulbs flashed, shouts thundered, but she heard nothing but the echo of the verdict. Not guilty. She was free. But freedom had chains that no court could take away. Because deep within her, there was a truth. She had poisoned her husband, and the man who had discovered her secret, the man who had taken the stand and spun the tale in her direction, was still out there, observing, waiting. And now she was indebted to him for everything. Closing hook for YouTube. The jury acquitted her, but the truth was grimmer than anyone could have hoped. Was justice served, or had Elena merely escaped with blood still on her hands?